the next gen rate is only $59. And so when you register for there, that's one of the options that you can choose is the next gen rate. All right, so I'm going to invite Jessica Pierce up. She is on our lead team. She is our recruitment specialist, vetter extraordinaire, and she's going to introduce our speaker team.
Thank you, Randy. Matt, from a boring HR person, I'm just saying we're all not that bad. Okay.
I'm an HR too.
Okay. Well, I'm honored to get to introduce Joel today. So, for those of you that may not know, Joel was with North Point Community Church for 16 years as a lead pastor and also a teaching pastor, and then came to Arizona almost 5 years ago to lead Mission Community Church. And so, make sure if you are tweeting or doing Insta or that you use the hashtags, we've got them on every one of Joel's slides and utilize the Vision Arizona hashtags as well. But I'm honored. Aren't you honored to have Joel here today? Please help me welcome Joel Thomas.
I wasn't probably supposed to come up this way, but I decided to do it anyway. Thank you so much for that. I have to say this, this wasn't part of the deal. Nobody asked me to do this, but two things really quick. I actually came to the Ignite conference last year and brought two pastors that weren't going to come that are outside of our network. And just one of the things you know is, you may not know, is most of the pastors in this area or your area, they don't know what this is going on. And when I started telling them, hey, what was involved, and I paid for them to come, they said, hey, we would have paid to come. In fact, both of them are coming with me this year, also to the Ignite conference. So I just want to say that you probably know somebody who's outside of our network. They have no idea that this is happening in their backyard, and it's a really significant event. A couple of my great friends are speaking at it this year, so that's extra fun for me. The other thing I want to say, and she didn't pay me to say this, but if you have people you're trying to place on your team or in other churches, I'll say this, when Mission was in massive decline, you're going to hear about that in a minute, both before me and because of me, Jessica helped us place people who were incredible ministry people in great roles in other churches, maybe some of your churches, where they were able to do meaningful ministry. She's very gifted in that, and so she's somebody who could be of help to you in that. If you're looking for someone or looking to help somebody find their next role or the right role for them, she's a fantastic person to do that. I want to pray for us. I want to pray for you before we jump in. I know we're already praying, but I don't think we can get too much of that. So let me pray for us real quick. God, I just pray you use these moments maybe to really encourage some of us, maybe to open some of our minds. I pray that you use a little bit about my journey to speak to somebody, maybe where they are in their story or about their past experience, and that these moments would be redemptive, that they would be transcendent of just the time we're going to spend here, that outside of this room and outside of this time, you would use it to bring new life in the churches that are represented here and to build your kingdom. And I just trust all these moments to that end. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to do my best. I have a really hard time seeing the clock, which is always a bad thing for a preacher. But I'm going to do my best to stay within this time. But what I was asked to speak on is what I've learned in the 4 or so years that I've been here. I've been here 4.5 years now. And I'm going to talk about 4 things I've learned in the last 4 years, and they're not pretty at all. In fact, some of this stuff I probably wouldn't talk about outside of this room. I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable today, so I'm going to ask you to use the information wisely that we talk about in this room. So I'm going to share some things about some of our own sort of battle wounds and things we experienced over the last 4 years in this room. But I just feel like all of that has been super helpful for my growth. And to the degree that it might be helpful for you, I want to kind of be as honest and transparent as I can. I came to Mission 4.5 years ago. I'll get more to this in a second, but literally kicking and screaming. I didn't think there was a better job. I didn't think there was a better place. I was the first intern at North Point Community Church. I started there in 1998, just after the church had started. I was there almost 17 years. I started as the first intern. Before I left for the last 4 years, I was leading the largest of the 7 campuses within the church. Literally, when I started there, we were 800 people every other Sunday night meeting at a Baptist church on Sunday evenings. And when I left, the organization was something like 40,000 people and 400 staff members. And so it was this remarkable thing to be a part of. And I learned so much in that. But I will tell you, just a few months after getting here, I made a phone call to Andy. Some of you know Andy Stanley, some of you may not, but he was my former boss, and I called him and I said, everything I know in leadership, I learned from you, but nothing I learned from you prepared me at all for anything that I'm dealing with right now at this church. It literally was like, I came completely unprepared. And I didn't know that talk that you mentioned earlier. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I was learning a lot about what I didn't know. I only knew one model, and I only knew something that was growing. When I first started, again, I was an intern. It was small, and it grew at this rapid pace, and all I knew was something that went up and to the right. I had never dealt with anything that was declining, or I didn't know how to turn anything around. I was the wrong candidate for lots of reasons. But I will tell you, I was absolutely certain this is what God wanted us to do. But when we got here and things were declining, I didn't know why. I didn't know how to change it. I mean, I knew an event had happened. If you're familiar, I followed a moral failure at the church. I wasn't here for any of that, so I don't like to talk about a whole lot. But the church was in decline, and it probably flattened out just a little bit when I got there. And then after everybody met me, it went further in decline. That's actually the truth. And so I didn't know how to fix that. I had to be me. But I didn't want to change that, and I actually was brought by the elders to change direction. One of the things we talked about before I even got here was, hey, we feel like we've lost our way a little bit, and not that everything we've done is wrong, but we want to get back to where we started. We planted a Great Commission church, and we've sort of gotten away from that, and we really want to reach people in the East Valley for Christ. We're not looking at trying to draw people out of other churches. We really want to reach unchurched people. So we were making this shift, and a lot of things were really volatile, and lots of people were leaving the church, and there were all sorts of different reasons, and I realized a lot of them had nothing to do with me. There were people that were hurt and that were mad long before I got there, and I was just sort of the reason that gave them to leave, and that was okay, and that was part of their spiritual journey, and I believe that. But it was a really difficult thing for me. I had never been in a situation where, I think I'm a pretty likable guy. I mean, we came from a situation where I was there before most everybody who was there, and they loved us, and I was sure they wanted to be there. In fact, Andy kept telling me, are you sure you want to go? I don't really want you to go, and I didn't really want to go. And it was sort of like this thing that God was really clear where to go do. But when we got here, I wasn't sure anybody wanted us to be here, and I was pretty certain nobody liked us. And so it was really difficult. About 8 months after coming, we went back to visit. And some of it was my whole family lived there. I lived in a neighborhood with my brother and my sister and their kids. And so some of it was we went back to visit them, but some of it was just we wanted to go back and be around people that we know and loved and spent years and years and years in ministry with. And one of the things I realized when we got there was life had just gone on. And we didn't really fit there anymore. And it was like, I don't know what I thought. I mean, I didn't really think about it. When I got there, I was like, oh, they're not holding a place for me. And somebody's moved into my old house and they painted it. And it doesn't even, they tore up all my landscaping that I spent all this work on. It's like it was almost like as if we were never there. And that was really difficult. And I remember leaving there, we were driving to Kanakuk. Some of you know Kanakuk camps. I speak there in the summers. And we were driving there to go to camp. And it's late at night. My kids are asleep in the back seat. And my wife and I were having this really tearful conversation about how we had moved our family all the way across the country, and that certainly didn't feel like home yet. That was really difficult. But we went back to visit what we thought was home, and it didn't feel like home either. And we're literally feeling lost. We're just, in this tearful conversation in the car, we're talking, and it's just it's really heavy. And I was talking about my experience, and all these people, they were excited to see us and happy, but it was like we left and they just went on to their life, and it was like, this is really hard. We're trying to find where do we fit. And I remember talking in the middle of this, and this isn't that uncommon. In the middle of this conversation, my wife fell asleep, which happens a lot when I'm talking in conversation. She fell asleep, and she's asleep in the car next to me, and on the radio was just on, and so after I found out she was asleep, I stopped talking, obviously, and listened to the radio, and a song by Carrie Underwood comes on. Temporary Home comes on the radio, and I'm having this really this deep moment, trying to discover if God's in this and what's going on. I literally remember turning off the radio. I was like, oh no, you are not using a Carrie Underwood song in my story at this moment, and I'm not going to stand on stage and tell people about this, but here we are. So I turned the radio back and I listened to the song, and I just thought, this is it. This This is what we're dealing with. And just, again, this isn't as a pastor. This is as a follower of Jesus. Like, I realized, like, what we had done and what we were doing, and this is on a personal level, is we were trying to set up something that felt like home. We're trying to recover the home that we're all trying to recover. And we found ourselves in this really interesting spot. And later, the next day, when my wife, we got back to this conversation, I told her about the song. I'm like, this is the craziest thing. But I just realized, like, we've got to have a serious mind shift. This is a great opportunity for us to grow. And the reality is we had placed too much of our identity in who we were associated with, and what we did. And we're supposed to be leading this church, and we feel lost. And it's because of what we've placed our identity in. One of the things I discovered is, and this is the first point, I've learned 4 things. The first one is association forms identity. Association forms identity, or forges identity. The truth is this is true of all of us. What you associate. In fact, there's a very simple equation. What you associate yourself with. When you think about this, we all do this. Where you associate yourself, and with whom you associate yourself with. These 3 things. And when you think about how you introduce yourself, we all do this. You tell where you're from, or you've even done this as you sit here, meet new people. You talk about what you do, what's your role, where are you from, who are you connected with, who are you associated with. The things you most associate with yourself with forge your identity. These are things, association, I'm going to talk more about this in a second. Association is a form of attachment, not in the clinical sense. But it's a form of attachment. The more you associate yourself with something, the more attached your mind and your heart and your soul. And one of the things I discovered was I had so associated myself with what I did before. A previous role, I had about a dozen different roles, from intern to lead pastor of the original campus of North Point Ministries, actually North Point Community Church. I had a series of roles, and I associated myself with what I did. Where I was from, the community of people. I lived in a neighborhood with my brother and my sister. The mayor of the town is one of my closest friends. I had baptized half my neighborhood, hired most of the staff there. I mean, these people and this place, and I'll even say this in here, and it's kind of weird to talk about him because he's not here, but even Andy, connected to Andy. I moved out here and I realized not a lot of people know who Andy Stanley is. I mean, a lot of church leaders do, but most people at our church, they didn't know who Andy was, so that didn't matter at all. And all of a sudden I realized, like, a lot of the things I associated myself with are gone. That's actually a really good thing for you. It was a really hard thing for me, but it's a really good thing for you. When you have to really go, okay, what really is my identity? It's so interesting. A few weeks later, I'm not trying to make myself sound spiritual. I just was in the morning, and I don't even remember which letter it was, one of Paul's letters, and for the first time, off the pages jumped from me. Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ. Kingdom of heaven, not of earth. Like these words are jumping off the page, and it was almost as if Paul was, this rhetoric was, I'm going to introduce myself to you, and I'm going to associate. Now that's sort of weird in our culture if you introduce yourself that way to people, but almost for Paul it was like, hey, this is my identity. It's so deeply rooted. I'm not like part of this as he moved around, which is, something he obviously did a lot. It wasn't like his identity was a part of the Corinthian church. It wasn't a part of the church of Ephesus. It wasn't a part of the Philippian church. It was, I'm connected to Jesus and his kingdom. And, one of the things I love about gatherings like this is the more we can see ourselves not connected to just Converge, and I apologize, Bruce, or Vision, Arizona. It's the kingdom of God, and hey, we're from different tribes, but this is our identity. This is who we're connected to. The competition, the challenge, the trying to one-up, it goes away. And we become more vulnerable with one another. We feel more connected to one another. It's one of the things I love about gatherings like this. But this is a thing that subtly, I'll tell you, it happens to all of us. And especially church planners. Because you're so trying to forge an identity for your church, and you should do that. There's nothing wrong with that. And for your thing, and for how you're going to talk about your mission and your vision, you spend hours and hours and hours thinking about it, talking about it, trying to flesh that out. And try to beat it into and drill it into your church and into your leaders. You've done so much of that. If you're not careful, you attach yourself, and not just yourself, you attach people that you're leading to the wrong things. You begin to associate and forge an identity to things that you weren't meant to, and I wasn't meant to attach our identity to. And I just say humbly submit to you, like, that was my main problem when I got here, is that my identity wasn't attached to the right things. And it was a challenging season as I had to learn that and to figure that out. But that was so important because I had to be leading people to attach themselves to the right things, and they were attached to some things that weren't the best things. And I don't want to talk about the past, but the second thing I want to talk about just for a minute is the fact that the reason association attachment is important is because commitment is complicated. Commitment, getting people to commit to your mission, your vision, your church, or leadership positions is complicated. And if you're single in the room, you're wanting to say amen out loud, and you're welcome to do that. Like, commitment is complicated. And it's complicated in a lot of different ways. Now, it's going to sound like I'm name dropping. I don't mean it to do that this way. I more want to give credit. Two people became great friends to me that understood about leading change in this season as I was trying to go. I have no idea what I'm doing. Things are going this direction, and I can tell you why, and I know the things that we're doing, and you know this. If you've ever been in a declining church and you've had financial problems, if you lay people off or you cut programs, you actually create more problems. You actually send more people away. So you're never going to cut your way to success, but we had to be fiscally responsible. And I'm going, I don't know what to do different. Like, it wasn't even really about something. A lot of the other things we're doing. It's just this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It just continues to snowball. So as I'm in the middle of that, I'm going, hey, how do we stop this? And everybody I talk to, like, they would tell me, oh, this is how you do it. I've talked to people, and the reality is nobody knows. Like, there was no one size fits all. This works for every situation. And then I met Judd Wilhite, and I met Judd years ago, and I'm not sure he remembers it, but he became a great friend of mine. And he said, I want to help you. And I thought, I'll never forget one day, he said, well, here's the thing, you're dealing with at least 3 different people in your church. The problem is you're seeing everybody the same. There's at least 3 different groups of people in your church. And I could I've spent lots more time talking about this in the time we have today, just this one thing. But one of the things that he said to me is, most of you know this, you've heard this, there's the crowd, there's the people that are part of your church that are the crowd, there's your congregation, and then there's the core. And you need to message differently to those people. And I said, okay, I get that. There's different people that and he said, here's what you need to remember. This is about investment. This is about what they have invested in your church. But this is how people are connected. How they're connected to your church. And they have different levels of investment, so they feel differently about different things that change in your church. And that was super helpful. But a few days, or maybe a few weeks later, I was having another conversation in a call group with some other pastors, with Carrie Newhoff, actually, who's going to be here for Ignite. Tremendous leader, tremendous thinker. You should come just for him, honestly. If you weren't going to come to the conference, he's worth it just himself. But he was talking to me about change. You can write this name down. There's a guy named Eugene Ferguson. He's written a lot about change. He's an extraordinary leader when it comes to change. I don't think he's a believer, but he's studied change a lot. He said, look, there's people, and this isn't. He's written a lot more about this, but there are people who are resistant to change. They resist change. There's people that are open to change, and there's people initiate change. And there's all of these people. This is their relationship to change. Sorry, this isn't super legible, but I'll say it out loud so you can. And this relationship to change is something that you have no control over. It doesn't change. This is just an is. Some people have, they really just, they don't want anything in their life to change, and they're up in arms when it does. You've met all these people in ministry that email you on a regular basis. There are people that are open to change, that are like, well, they're just going to wait and see how it goes. And then there's people who are going, when you're going to change something, they're the first people to show up. They're the first people to get involved. And these different groups of people in your church. And I remember Carrie telling me, you have to approach these different people related to these different levels of change. And this is really, again, on some level about attachment. Different type of attachment, again, not in the clinical sense, but the more attached you are to something, a program, a leader, the more, you're going to be resistant. And the less you are, the more you're going to be open or you're going to want to initiate change. Here's why this is important. Is if you're trying to lead any sort of change or you're trying to get a hold of something or even move anything forward, I think understanding this, for me, was not only the key to retaining, but the key to leading and the key to transitioning anything. Here's what you need to know. There are different groups of people and their ability, or your ability to move them towards that change is ranked in this order. Just think for a second. If somebody they're an initiator of change and they're highly invested in your church, it is not going to be hard for you to get them to go in a new direction or to jump onto a new initiative. If somebody who's not very connected, they're sort of on the fringe and they hate change and you're going to do something new, is that me? Check. I call those people ghosts because those people, is that my mic?
Yeah.
Check. Those people, they're not interested in change at all, and you probably don't even know them because they're not. They probably just show up at church on the weekend. If you change something about the style of the music or the preaching strategy or anything like that, you're never even going to hear from them. They're gone. So here's the thing. This is the level at which it's going to be difficult to change them. Not very difficult to very, very difficult. Here's was the big aha for me. I was spending all of my time with two groups of people. Any guesses? Any guesses? The ones and the ones and the fives. Here's why. And I was going back and forth. I actually spent a lot of time in counseling talking about this, believe it or not. The ones were like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And guess what? It's not. Whatever it is, whatever you're doing, somebody comes, it's the greatest thing ever. That's the greatest sermon ever. I'll just, not to rain on your parade, it's not. And there's other people going, this is the worst thing ever, you're ruining our church. You're not. Here's the interesting thing about this. Eugene Ferguson, he's the expert. I've done a lot of research on this. And church statistics. Ed Stetzer, used some of his research actually, and the Barna Group. Both of these things, believe it or not, function on a bell curve. Now, we can talk all day about bell curves. The normal distribution on a bell curve is 68% in the center. If you want to get literal, it's 34%, early, late adopters. About 16% on the outside. Here's what this means. This is the only reason I bring this up. These two groups of people, they represent 5%, 2.5% and 2.5% of your church. The people that tell you everything's great, the people that tell you everything's terrible, that's 5% of your church. 5%. That's what I spend all my time with. Those are the people that are the most vocal, those are the people that talk most. And one of the things I discovered in the midst of this was the people I needed to know were the twos. The reason I need to know the twos, and you can do the math later if you want, they're about 10% of your church, is because the twos are going to help you with the fours. People don't move this left and right on the scale. They move up and down. They either are really involved, they move to not involved to out of your church, or they move to from the fringe or the crowd to the congregation to being part of your core. They move up and down. And the fours represent 50% of your church. So here's what I did. I went and found all the people that were highly invested, that were highly engaged, that were part of our core. And all of those people that I knew because they were ones or fives, because everything was great, everything was terrible, I scratched all their names off the list. And all the people I didn't know were the twos. They were open to change. They were open, and their information, their feedback, the things that they knew was the most valuable information to me. And when I began to learn from the twos and speak to our church and speak to our congregation, the broader congregation related to the twos, things began to change significantly. When I sat down with them and they said, hey, you need to talk about this. You need to clarify this. I don't understand what you mean by this. When I began to do that, that changed everything. Again, because commitment is complicated. But commitment is usually just the combination of the things, people's attachment, how much they're resistant to or open to change, and their investment. Attachment and investment equals commitment. And attachment is much more about how you make people feel. There's people who are resistant to change that don't feel insecure if you communicate to them in the right way. So this is helpful not just in declining anything you're doing. whether it's a capital campaign, whether it's a new program you're connecting, when you sit down with key leaders, you sit down with people in your church, and I'll just tell you, this graph is the only thing that sits on my desk, that stays on my desk all the time, is this chart right here. Because every time I sit down with a leader, I'm trying to figure out, what number are you? Because when I sit down and I figure out, this isn't manipulative, when I understand what number you are, and I understand your relationship to change and your relationship to our church, I know how to communicate to you. And this became critically important to us. And that was critical in our ability to help people to commit and transition to a new vision and new leadership in our church. And it was a game changer for us, but it was an important part of not just, and it wasn't just like getting people to commit to things. It was in terms of communication. I began to preach and cast vision differently because I had better information about the majority. Just think about this a second. If you learn about the twos, they help you understand what 70% of your church thinks and feels related to what they're experiencing. So you need to find out who those twos are. And you need to make a list. And again, you just take your core and eliminate everybody you know. And you probably eliminated all the ones and fives. All the people you don't know well, they're not beating down your door because they're not on fire about anything. They're not all excited about something or all against something. And on some level, they trust you to some degree, and they're open to maybe a new direction or a new idea or something in your church. But those people are people that are really going to help you lead forward. This is important because I'll just tell you, I came to a point where, but just before I discovered some of this, I wanted to quit. In fact, I wanted to quit before I started. I mentioned this at the beginning. We sort of came kicking and screaming. We knew that this is, I don't have time to tell you this whole story, but through a series of circumstances, after Mission had first reached out to us, I filled in preaching. There was a year where they brought people from all over the country to speak that were able to give a weekend. So I preached one weekend at the church, and they followed up with me afterwards. And I was not interested in the job at all, and told them, hey, thank you. That's very flattering, but we're not interested. And my wife was like, so why aren't you interested? And that's a whole other story. There was another time where we had a conversation. She fell asleep on me. We'll talk about that another day. But I realized there was something in me that was like really pushing back against this. And I don't know if that's something I'm doing or maybe this cable I'm stepping on. So we were really pushing back, but God made it really clear, like, this is what we're supposed to do. And the short of all of that is, at some point, even after sort of offending the elders of like, hey, I basically was like, hey, I think that's awesome. I hear what you're looking for. I hear what your vision, your mission is. I'm not sure that's the vision and mission of the church. And that's definitely not me. And I thought I sort of offended them. And they were like, wow, for all of those reasons, we think you're the right guy. And I was like, what conversation were you just in? Like, that's not the same conversation I was in. And long story short, God made it really clear we were to leave where we were and move to Arizona. And when we got here, what became more difficult is really being committed to what we felt like we were obedient to come and do. Because at every turn, there was opposition. And every meeting, in every situation, in every circumstance. In fact, there was one meeting, and I'd like to say this is stay in the room. I don't know if it's possible or not. I'm going to trust all of you. I still call it the $1 million meeting. Because I went to meet with a group of people that was put together by one of the guys who was on our board. He's the treasurer, and he knew several people that were upset. They wanted to meet with me. I met lots of people that were upset about all sorts of different things. Things that happened before I got there, about things they didn't think were handled well by the board, things that were happening in ministry areas. And I was just trying to gain information and find out what I didn't know to lead the best. And this meeting was specifically a group of people that were high capacity donors to the church who were upset and wanted sort of to let me know of their concerns and wanted to know what I was going to do about it. And so I remember when I was having a conversation with a couple of guys on our board and one of the guys on our staff before we were going to go to this meeting. It was earlier in the day. And I said, so what's the goal of this meeting? Like, what's everybody think we're trying to accomplish? And at the end of the conversation, I realized the goal was for the meeting to go well so that these people wouldn't leave. And I remember leaving there, going home. I didn't really say anything at that meeting. I went home with my wife, and I just was like, okay, that's interesting. I went home, and my wife was like, this is a terrible goal for a meeting. Like, I don't even want to go to the meeting. In fact, I don't think I want to be the pastor anymore. I think I want to go, let's just go somewhere somewhere else. I mean, I don't know where we can go, but like, I don't want to go to the meeting. I just sort of want to turn in my resignation now. And yet I knew like the direction we were headed, sort of God had worked within the board and in our hearts to come here for. And when we got here, do you want me to just switch mics? Yeah, let's do that. So when I got to the meeting, on the way in, this is never a good idea, by the way, with your elders. On the way in, I said, hey, I just want you to have a different goal for the meeting. And they were like, okay. I said, I think we just need to be really clear about what we're going to do. Like, we should just make sure when we leave, they're not unclear about what we're saying. Because if there's just a lack of clarity about what we're going to do or what we're planning to do, because what we're not going to do is pretend that we're going to meet somewhere in the middle, because then everybody loses. That's compromise, by the way. Compromise is terrible, because everybody loses. Nobody actually gets what they want. And when you compromise a vision, you compromise a decision, it just becomes compromised. And so I just told myself, I think we just need to be really clear about what we're going to do. So we got in the meeting, and I feel like this would be offensive to people, but it's what it is. It's what actually happened. These group of people are like, hey, here's what we want you to do. There's this Bible verse. We came here for this, and we want to know, are you getting rid of this Bible verse? And I was like, well, it's in the Bible. Like, I don't think I have the ability to get rid of it. So I didn't really like the joke. They didn't laugh like you did. Nobody thought that was funny. I said, well, here's the thing. No, but are you asking me, are we moving away from that as a central purpose of our church? We are. Because I don't think that's the central purpose of the church. We can disagree on that, but it's not just me. That's why the board hired me. It's because we felt like we were going in a direction that wasn't necessarily representative of why this church was planted. It wasn't Great Commission focused. It really isn't what Vision Arizona is all about, to be honest with you. We're in this network. And so, anyway, I just said, hey, this is what we're doing. And I really feel like, our legacy is going to be how we impact those who are around us and those who come behind us. And our vision needs to represent that. That's who we are. We're a local church. And literally they were like, well, that's not what we signed up for. And I was like being a Christian? Isn't that what we signed up for? Like, I didn't get it. Like, I was sort of lost, but I was like, well, this is what we're doing. And of course, the meeting didn't go well. And all of them but one decided not to stay with the church. So if you were hoping the meeting was going to go well and everybody's going to stay, and that's not what happened. But I went home. Here's the point of the story. I went home, and I laid my head in the pillow that night. This was way after my wife had gone to sleep, and she asked me, how'd the meeting go? And I said, terrible. Like, I don't think any of those people are going to stick around. And she said, well, how do you feel about that? I was like, I slept great. And she said, really? And I said, yeah. I said, I literally laid my head on my pillow, and the thought that came through my mind was, I was obedient today. I don't care what you're in the middle of. Obedience trumps outcomes. That's number 3. Obedience trumps outcomes every single time. Some of you're thinking about quitting, but God's called you to what you're doing right now. Don't you quit. I don't care how hard it is. I don't care what's going on. The reality is your obedience will trump the outcome. Don't compromise to control an outcome. Don't try to manipulate an outcome. Your job is not outcomes. If you want to take control of outcomes, fine, but you're going to take God's job. You're going to try and do God's job. And He's much better at controlling outcomes than you are. Your job is obedience, not outcomes. The quicker I realized that, I've been trying to, and it was sort of this really difficult thing that forged that for me. But I realized my job is not outcomes. My job is obedience. I need to do the next right thing. If you don't take anything else from today, trust me. I'm telling you, in a very different situation right now. I never thought I'd be here. I thought they were going to fire me, get rid of me. They should have, probably, at some point. The reality is obedience is so much better than outcomes. If you're being obedient before your Heavenly Father, if you're being obedient to what you've been called to, if you're being obedient under the authority you've been placed under, it's extraordinary. Some of you think, well, I don't have the strength. I don't know if I can go on any more than this. I'm going to tell you something. This is so important. And as church leaders, we put too much confidence in strategies and structures. What's everybody else doing that's working? Here's why this obedience is important. Because when it comes to the spiritual life, and I'll just tell you, this is where I was. When it comes to the spiritual life in our faith, the reality is God's always working. He's working in all of our lives. And the truth is he's working to accomplish his purposes. And again, you know this. You don't need me to tell you this. And his power is always flowing. And I'll tell you this, this is where I was. I was over here, and when I left North Point, I'll just tell you, the way they loved on me, it's almost embarrassing. What they did when they celebrated Jen and I before we left, and the way Andy honored us in the church and talked about what we were going to, he owed me nothing. I was leaving his church. I was a succession plan for him at the largest of the campuses that involved it, and I was creating a problem for him. But the way they loved on us, the way they cared